neurological disorders now. And this will be new to some people who haven't really dealt with the elderly or the frail older person in a care setting. So we're going to look at Parkinson's disease and cognitive impairment, which includes dementia and Alzheimer's disease. We're going to talk a little bit about sensory impairments and multiple sclerosis. So Parkinson's disease is a degenerative disorder which affects part of the brainstem involved in the regulation of voluntary movement and posture. Neurotransmitter dopamine is the chemical responsible for sending messages to the voluntary muscles. It is not produced, or it's not produced enough to get the muscles to move. And a major challenge for people with Parkinson's is that balance is impaired, and it reduces their quality of life and increases the risk of falls, obviously, and injury. Okay, the symptoms include tremors, rigidity, slowness of movement, postural changes, balance impairment, falling, decline in fine motor skills, social withdrawal, and depression. Remember, physical activity lifts the lid, and think of what you can do, not what you can't do for someone with any of these disorders. So the implications include risk of falling, festination, which is short shuffling steps, inactivity, tire sooner, they have a decreased respiratory function, and a decreased, or can have a decreased cognitive function. Do simple, repetitive, functional exercises. Watch out for fatigue, as they get very tired easily and quickly. Focus on postural activities, in particular movement around the trunk area. Extensors and rotators are very important to include in a session. Include some exercise to improve their fine motor skills. That's finger exercises. So pause for another task. Pens at the ready. You got them? Right. Suggest 3 activities that would improve stability and reduce the risk of falling for Parkinson's sufferers. Did you get 3? Tai Chi, line dancing, random and repetitive movement, resistance bands or strength training for functional fitness. Research has shown that Tai Chi improves postural stability while increasing functional stability. And the advantages of Tai Chi exercise is simplicity and no equipment is necessary. Well, as an instructor, you don't have to become a master in Tai Chi, but you should include adapted moves during your session. It is something that you can teach someone with Parkinson's disease as a self-care home activity as well. Impaired cognitive function can occur, so learning new tasks can take longer. Be aware. So the physical guidelines for Parkinson's disease are: do exercises to promote good posture, exercises to maintain mobility and flexibility, use large expansive movements, example stretching and reaching out and all of that. Do balance and coordination activities to reduce the risk of falling. Exercise for the trunk, as I said, especially around the spine. Exercise for facial muscles and speech. Exercise for breathing. Relaxation exercises are very important as well, and keep it simple. KISS. Avoid complicated movements, exercising to the point of fatigue. Jerky or fast movements. Avoid strength work, especially isometrics, and avoid neck exercises. Any type of repetitive steps, for example line dancing and folk dancing, will improve cognitive function and stability. Also, singing along and repeating out loud any moves. Example, 1, 2, 3, clap. It's very beneficial for concentration and breathing muscles. But be careful of the neck area, as mentioned earlier, because it may cause dizziness. But avoid doing neck exercises completely if the neck is affected, as it often is. Include some exercises to improve the fine motor skills. That's the finger exercises, as I said. According to the UK Physical Activity Guidelines for older adults at risk of falls should undertake activity to improve balance and coordination at least 2 days a week. There is a new handheld device invented by a person with Parkinson's called the Smoothie, as in smooth move, and they are easier to use than hand weights and are more effective for sufferers of this disease. I think they're around €50 a pair. Now, cognitive impairments. We'll look at dementia. Dementia is not a disease itself, but rather a group of signs and symptoms that characterize certain diseases and conditions. Dementia is often defined as a decline in the intellectual functioning that is severe enough to interfere with the ability to perform routine activities. In addition, depression and reaction to drugs may mimic the signs and symptoms of dementia. The causes of dementia include Alzheimer's itself, multiple cerebral strokes, Parkinson's disease, as I said, thyroid disease, brain tumours, head injuries. There are many more. But dementia is a progressive disease for which there is no cure as yet. Average duration for survival is about 5 to 10, maybe possibly 15 years, with the prevalence of dementia rising steeply with age. There are many more causes, too numerous to mention, for example, alcoholism, CJD, mad cow disease, and brain infections. We will discuss Alzheimer's now in more detail. Before we get into Alzheimer's, I just want to say that the symptoms of dementia are loss of kinesthetic awareness, passive or aggressive behaviour, withdrawal, and depression. Now, kinesthetic awareness means disorientation or loss of ability to connect with your surroundings, memory loss, agitation, and disruptive behaviour, and they're quite literally demented. All of this behaviour would be normally associated with dementia. The frail older category of ageing, that would be 80 plus, are the fastest growing group at the moment with dementia. So now we'll talk about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease. This disease is a progressive degenerative disease that attacks the brain and results in impaired memory, thinking, and behaviour. It is a terminal illness. It is the fourth leading cause of death in people over 65 years of age, preceded only by cancer, heart disease, and stroke. Symptoms again include loss of memory, loss of intellectual abilities, confusion, language problems, decreased poor judgment, disorientation in place and time, behaviour and personality changes, and repetitive compulsive behaviour. Alzheimer's has a gradual onset. It's when difficulty with memory and intellectual abilities become severe enough to interfere with daily living. All of these behavioural problems may fluctuate from day to day. Eventually, this disease leaves its victims totally unable to care for themselves. Presently, there is no treatment to stop or reverse the mental deterioration of Alzheimer's. And although exercise cannot slow down or change the progression of this disease, it can and does enable a person to remain functionally mobile, active, and healthy very far into the disease. It's another task, another question. Could you write down 5 examples for me of activities that you would use to create a fun and enjoyable session for people with cognitive impairments? So what did you come up with? Well, modified games such as catch and throw, target games, keeping a score. Keeping a score ensures that they might get a success. Using brightly coloured equipment, very important, scarves, softballs, games using a parachute, they love parachutes, dancing and singing, which combines self-expression and socialising, and is great too, and it connects with the long-term memory. Aerobic activity is highly recommended to increase the cerebral blood flow and produces beta-endorphin, which is the feel-good hormone. So the physical activity guidelines for cognitive disorders would be to do shorter sessions. Mornings are usually better. Simple instructions, throwing, catching. Familiar routines, dancing and singing. Frequent repetition and demonstration. Enjoyable, fun activities, and they ensure success. And calm, relaxing environment. When you're planning your activities, keep in mind the following guidelines. Shorter, simple, familiar, repetitive, structured, flexible, success, and, above all, fun. It won't be enjoyable if there isn't a sense of achievement or if it isn't a bit of fun. Don't forget relaxation and calmness in a warm down. That's also very important. It sends them away with a really good feeling and good experience. You should avoid complexity. A rigid structure. Avoid overstimulation, overwhelming instructions, overtiring, and long sessions. There are a number of issues which leaders must be very careful about when working or dealing with someone afflicted with a cognitive impairment. These include how to communicate effectively, safely, and managing the appropriate environment for learning. There may be a difficulty in understanding what is being said and or making themselves understood, so you must avoid complex patterns and new material. Overstimulation can make the person confused and overwhelmed. Therefore, the environment should be calm, quiet, familiar, enjoyable, comfortable, and organised. You could include quizzes and crosswords of some form of brain stimulation, preferably at the end of the class, to help socialisation and cognitive interaction. It doesn't have to be the simplex crossword. It can be, what day is it, or can you remember what it was yesterday, or some kind of a little quiz each day to make sure that they have some cognitive interaction. So, let's look at the sensory impairments. Visual impairments, hearing impairment, the proprioceptors, and vertigo. Now, as a result of changes to our nervous system as we age, the skill-related components of physical fitness like reaction time, agility, speed, balance and coordination all deteriorate to some degree. Our sensory perception will also deteriorate, and this has the effect of reducing our ability to perform everyday tasks. And remember what I said, if we're not able to do the activities of daily living, then it's very unlikely we will be confident enough to progress to physical activity itself, or even more formal exercise and sport. So the physical activity guidelines for visually impaired, let's look at that. Give precise verbal instructions. Use gentle touch, and you do that with permission, usually holding them at the elbow. Use gentle touch with permission is really important. You must get their permission. Do not cause discomfort by pulling or pushing into position. Stand close to the participant in front if that's possible. Avoid complex moves and directional change. So the communication and observation skills here for the instructor are very important. And for the visually impaired, it is necessary to be very precise while cueing the movement. Have a signal or code that the participant knows in advance. Correct or cease the activity if it proves too complicated. Check their understanding throughout the class. Your tone of voice and language should be clear. Avoid jargon. So let's look at the physical activity guidelines for hearing impaired. Get participants' attention. So the placement is very important here as well. Clearly enunciate your words, because they may lip read. Avoid shouting. Clear visual cues. check again the understanding, and use instrumental music with a definite beat. They can get vibrations through their feet and know exactly how to do the rhythm. Generally, the first 15 seconds of speech are lost to everyone anyway, not only hearing impaired people. So make sure that you've got their attention by saying something like, how are you, how you doing, everybody okay, everybody feeling all right, before you need to get an important message into them. Also, a lot of people don't know the extent of their hearing loss, so it's very important before you're starting to give any instruction that you have their attention, so that they'll comprehend what you're saying, and also for a safety point of view. Use a variety of mediums to communicate your message, visual and verbal. So for sensory impairments, avoid. Now let's look at the visually impaired first. Low nods of the head, lowering the head below the chest level, and activities that cause straining. Hearing impaired then, avoid using music with vocals which may compete with the leader's voice. Avoid neck exercises where inner ear disorders are present. And a few additional guidelines for both impairments. Instructors should be careful of dropping their heads down and mumbling instructions. And this often happens when demonstrated, maybe say, seated stretches, and they may be seated. Most of the older people want to be seated, so chairs are very important to have in your class. Also, music is very important, even to hearing impaired. It should be age appropriate and the beat very definite. As I said, often participants can pick up vibrations. So, proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are sensors situated in our muscles that provide information to our limbs, trunk, head and neck. For example, joint angle, muscle length or muscle tension. This information is sent via the nerves to our brain. On the basis of this info received, the brain sends messages to the different parts of our body to make any adjustments necessary to maintain our balance. So, example, if we walk up a hill, our brain will make our bodies lean forward. Otherwise, we would fall backwards. Types of proprioceptors that I'm going to talk about are muscle spindle, and 2, Golgi tendon organ. A muscle spindle is a proprioceptor which provides information about changes in muscle length activated during muscle stretch. And the Golgi tendon organ is a proprioceptor which provides information about changes in muscle tension activated during muscle contraction. If you think about it like this and compare proprioceptors to nerve endings that have come unplugged over age, then it is just a matter of sticking the cable ends back into place to reactivate them. This is what balance and coordination exercises do for the older person. Kind of boot up the impulses once again. So the effects of aging on proprioceptors. Loss of sensory information from the eyes, ears and position receptors. Difficulty in coordinating body motion, example walking, and difficulty in coordinating fine motor skills, like using a pen to write. In general, it is accepted that the natural deterioration in the functioning of our senses as we age cause simple accidents, trips, small falls. But this can build up over time and older people begin to lose confidence. It is a vicious circle. But inactivity is probably the most significant contributor to the cycle. If you don't use it, you lose it. Vertigo, characterized by a feeling of spinning movement, sometimes accompanied by nausea and vomiting. This condition can sometimes happen for no apparent reason. Taking medication and lying down may cause vertigo to pass, but the aftermath of a stroke or a traumatic brain injury may leave a person with a constant feeling of vertigo. If this happens, then the participant will need to see their doctor and be carefully screened. But there are very specific balance exercises that can be done every day to alleviate the symptoms, and their physiotherapist will be able to prescribe these. The symptoms include loss of balance, loss of coordination, falling down, headaches, migraines, dizziness or lightheadedness. Balance and coordination exercises will help the sufferer, but an instructor should exercise caution and be very aware of their participant at all times. In the course of my work, I have included vertigo because I have come across it so many times of late that people have vertigo and tell me that when I'm screening them. So this is why I'm putting it in. It's very important that you're aware of this condition. So the physical activity guidelines for vertigo are: do screen, read their medication, balance and coordination exercises, please do, possibly seated exercises will be very safe, and stretching exercises. Physical activity builds up endurance, strengthens the body, improves posture and contributes to a better quality of life. So it's really important to do physical activity with somebody with vertigo. Physical activity guidelines for vertigo: avoid rotational movement, complicated choreography, arms overhead type movement and isometric exercise. It goes without saying that rotational movement should be avoided, as it might make a person more lightheaded and dizzy. I have another 2 questions for you now. Given all the neurological disorders that we have mentioned so far, questions are: 1. How long should your warm-up be and why? Question 2. What exercises would you include now in your session? I will read that out again. How long should your warm-up be and why? First question. At least 15 minutes. Why? To make sure that all the joints are well lubricated. Question 2. What exercise would you include now in your session? Well, you would posture promoting exercise, balance and coordination exercises and strength exercises. And I just want to mention the joints. Well lubricated, you need to make sure the synovial fluid gets around older people's joints. And I always compare it to a jar of honey that's gone crystallized. That the joints and the synovial fluid have become crystallized, and you need to warm them up. You need to have it like runny honey. If you can remember that, it'll take a little while to do it, so it should be at least 15 minutes. We're moving on to multiple sclerosis now. This is a progressive degenerative neurological disorder affecting the central nervous system. This disorder has been included in this session because MS sufferers can often be in remission, and therefore they can do much the same type of exercise as people with the other neurological disorders that we have discussed previously. People with MS, the characteristics include muscle weakness or atrophy, spasticity, decreased coordination, tremors, decreased range of motion, and impaired breathing with their chest wall. Now, having said all of the above, a person with MS can still participate usefully in your class. The best person I had in my class was a young woman who was previously a physiotherapist, and she was in a wheelchair, and she was the best teacher of line dancing that I had come across when I was given these classes. The implications then for MS are fatigue, slower reaction time, reduced mobility, postural misalignment and pain. If a person with MS is in a wheelchair and is attending your class, make sure that you treat them with respect. Now, I know you would, but they're not cognitively impaired. Bend down and be at their level while talking to them, and try not to treat them any differently from other members of your class. So the physical guidelines Physical activity guidelines would be to do postural exercises, simple, slow movements, and work within the pain-free range. Avoid hyperextension of the cervical spine or the neck and overtiring. Most MS sufferers know their own limitations and know when to opt out of exercising, but all the safety checks and screenings would still apply. Finally, a few slides to discuss how energy for the muscles is affected by the aging process. Energy to muscles for older adults. Chemical energy stored in food is converted in the body for mechanical work. Example, muscle contractions. Not enough nutrition, no energy. That reserved for physical activity. This is a basic knowledge, so I'm not going to deal too much on it at this time. We'll be returning a bit to nutrition in the later session, but I have a last question for you. What effect would reduced muscle mass have on an older person's ability to do physical activity and or exercise? The answer: they would have less strength and endurance. They would have slower responses from muscle fibers. They would have restricted shallow breathing and an inadequate uptake of oxygen, which limits removal of lactic acid. Did you get that? So, the role of muscle then during exercise is to extricate the extraction of oxygen from capillary blood, utilization of oxygen in the mitochondria for the production of ATP, utilization of glycogen during anaerobic metabolism, of which a byproduct leads to the accumulation of lactic acid. So the implications then for the older adult would be in inspiration and expiration, that's the oxygen taken in, that's needed to assist in the removal of lactic acid, and that's the basis of the talk test. Shallow breathing or restricted breathing will limit the removal of lactic acid. Exercising too hard or using anaerobic pathways results in excess lactic acid, and this leads to cramp. This is why it is really important to keep an eye on breathing when working with older people. They tend to hold their breaths instead of holding in their stomachs. Watch out for the colour of their faces, as it's a good indication of intensity, obviously. Keep them talking or singing. If they have some form of lung disorder, they will have a very limited supply of oxygen, so that may be restricted. And too much lactic acid can cause an abrupt stop to exercising and can cause cramp, which is very debilitating, painful to an older person. So the implications then would be shorter session, joint stiffness, bad posture, back pain. They could be on drugs, example beta blockers, so the heart's a muscle, so that would affect their heart, and diuretics, which could cause dehydration, and that affects your muscle as well. So to summarise all of this, I'm going to read you out the World Health Organization guidelines for 2003, which are in the public domain, by the way. Immediate benefits of physical activity for older people, and the key word here is immediate. They're actually happening on the day. Helps reduce blood glucose levels. Adrenaline and noradrenaline levels are stimulated. You have improved sleep, enhanced sleep quality and quantity. And the long-term effects then of physical activity for older people are sustained improvements in cardiovascular endurance, maintenance of independence through resistance and strength training exercises, flexibility exercise repairs and restores the range of motion or movement around your joints, balance and coordination exercises reduce the risk of falls, and velocity of movement postpones the age-related decline in speed and agility. In other words, if you don't use it, you lose it.